The deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee.
Hello friends, okay, welcome back to our biblical reflections. Yesterday we were analyzing the duel, the fight between the Philistine giant Goliath and David the Israelite. And we already mentioned that David is growing in name and fame. Now, in chapter 18, 19 and 20, we find on one side, David is growing, and whereas on the opposite side, Saul is losing his grip. And besides, you will see the parties who were till now supporting Saul are now supporting David himself. Jonathan, the son of Saul, he is a crown prince. We find he was a very close friend of David. And we will see they make a covenant between them. And David had cherished that friendship till the end of Jonathan's life, we know. And also, he kept up that relationship to the children of Jonathan. And there is still another story that David loved the daughter of Saul, Michal. She fell in love with him, and David came forward to marry her. Therefore, everything now moves in favor of David, we can say. Therefore, this is the story that we find in these chapters. Now, we will go through the chapters just looking at the important messages that can be taken from the story. The chapter begins with the friendship between David and Jonathan. Chapter 18. The soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Verse 1. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. In verse 4, Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. And so that Saul set him over the army. In another way we can say, David grows. in favor of the king Saul. And with regard to the covenant between David and Jonathan, Jonathan, as I said, is the crown prince, one who is to be the king of Israel after Saul. But what does he do here? When they made a covenant or treaty between them, Jonathan exchanged his weapon, the armor, the robe, everything to David. This transferring of the royal robe, the armor, and so on, refers to the fact, or it implies that Jonathan is handing over his right to the royal throne to David. It is interpreted like this, because Jonathan stripped himself of the robe, the royal robe, it is said, and he gave it to David. Thus, we can say he is abdicating his right to the throne in favor of David. Such was their friendship. And therefore, David also loved Jonathan so much. That is why their souls were bound to each other, it is said. Such a close friend. That goes on one side. And on the other side, what happens? We can see that David is going to the fights, to the wars. Wherever Saul sent him, by the strength of the Lord, David could defeat the enemy and came back victorious. And then it is said, he was made the head of the army of Saul. He rose in position. But when the people began to greet David with a song, giving more importance to David even than to the king Saul, Saul began to be jealous. Not only that, he began to think, what more is needed for David now? He is beloved to the people more than myself, or more than I am. And that is what we would see here. Verse 8, when he heard the singing of the women folk, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry, for this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? And here is the cause of jealousy. So Saul eyed David from that day on. Then, because of that, again we see another negative development here in verse 10. The next day, an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Therefore, the jealousy leads him to kill David. Of course, in the effort, David was able to save himself. For the same story is repeated here. The story that we've already found in 16. There the evil spirit entered in the mind and heart of Saul. But here, because of the influence of the evil spirit, Saul is trying to kill David by throwing the spear. Therefore, we can see David is in danger of life. That's what we can say. And now Saul was trying to trap David in some way or other. Therefore, he said in verse 17, Saul said to David, "Here is my elder daughter Merab. I will give her to you as a wife." His intention was to trap David using his daughter, but David did not agree to that. In verse 18, David said to Saul, "Who am I and who are my kinsfolk, my father's family in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king?" But at the time when Saul's daughter Merab should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, some other one. But in 20 we find another development. Verse 20, Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and Saul was happy about it. Again he thought he can trap David using her. But that did not work out as he planned. And the story is narrated here. We will see. Verse 29. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David, and Saul's daughter Michal loved him, Saul was still more afraid of David, and he was developing his enmity towards David. And there is an effort to kill David narrated here in chapter 18. And therefore we can see, on one side David is growing stronger, and on the other Saul is becoming weaker and suspicious. That is the situation. Okay. And Saul realizes that even his son Jonathan is befriended or is a close ally or friend of David. That was still troubling him, as we see in the coming chapters. Okay, now let us go to chapter 19. And here we find Saul is trying to chase after David and kill him. And when he was in the house of Michal, Saul sent messengers or soldiers to finish him off. And understanding the situations, Michal helped him to escape through the window. And the soldiers came in, and they thought that David was sleeping on the bed, and they tried to kill David, but he had already escaped. And the story we read in 19:11. Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep watch over him, planning to kill him in the morning. David's wife Michal told him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window. He fled away and escaped. Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed. She put a net of goat's hair on his head and covered it with the clothes. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Saul sent the messengers to see David for themselves. "Bring him up to me in the bed that I may kill him." And when the messengers came in, the idol was in the bed with the covering of goats. Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me like this?" Michal answered, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" Anyhow, David escaped. And we will see David is going to Ramah, where Samuel was staying, and he explained everything to Samuel. But Samuel encouraged him, and we can say, verse 23, he went there toward Naioth in Ramah. The Spirit of God came upon him, and he was going, he fell into a prophetic frenzy until he came to Ramah. He too stripped off his clothes and he too fell into a frenzy before Samuel. Therefore, this is the story narrated about Saul who was in search of David. Okay, therefore, we will find the things are losing or from the grip of Saul. Saul was planning to chase David, but the Spirit of the Lord led him to a prophetic frenzy, and therefore he could not proceed in chasing David. And that story we find here in chapter 19. And therefore, here we can say David, the son of Saul, Jonathan, pleaded Saul to spare the life of David. But Saul was not ready for that. And this is the story narrated in the first part of chapter 19. And okay, David escaped from the area, and now what does he do? In chapter 20, we find David is trying to flee away from Saul. But Jonathan said, "Why should you go away? I will speak with the father once again and see what his mind is." And therefore, we will see the story narrated here and in chapter 20. And he said, verse 5, David said to Jonathan, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at the meal. But let me go, so that I may hide in the field until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice for all the family. If he says good, it will be well. If he is angry, then know that evil has been determined by him." Then Jonathan is consoling him. That is what we will find in the coming verse and so on. Then they make a covenant once again. And we will see verse 13. "May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father." 14. "If I am still alive, show me the faithful love of the Lord. But if I die, never cut off your faithful love from my house, even if the Lord were to cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." Thus Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord seek out the enemies of David." Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own life. Therefore, we can see, because of the covenant, David was ready to spare Jonathan. That is, if there is a war between David and Saul, naturally Jonathan is to fight with his father, fight together with his father against David. But now, according to the covenant, David is not supposed to kill Jonathan. And if Jonathan happens to be killed, his family is to be protected by David. Such is the covenant. And David agrees to that. And Jonathan knew that David is the chosen one by God, and therefore nothing can stop him from becoming the king. And that is the story that we find in chapter 20. And now according to the narrative, we see when Jonathan and Saul was sitting at the table, Saul asked, "Where is David?" And as told by David, Jonathan said he had asked permission to go to Bethlehem for fulfilling a vow. And the reaction of Saul was terrible. We will find verse 26 onwards. Why has the son of Jesse not come to the feast either yesterday or today? Verse 27. Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go. Verse 30. Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame? And then he says in 31, the real problem is this, for as long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore, Saul is doing all this in order to secure the throne for Jonathan. But Jonathan is not worried about the throne, but he is just worried about the life of David. And since he knew that Saul is angry and is determined to kill David, he is informed. So Jonathan informed David that to remain here is dangerous. Therefore, according to the plan they had already devised, Jonathan gave signal to David to escape, and thus Jonathan saved his life, we can say. And when David departs from Jonathan, once again he reminds of the covenant, and that is what we find towards the end of the chapter. Verse 41. As soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap, prostrated himself with his face to the ground. In a way, he is acknowledging the great deed of Jonathan. He has saved his life. Therefore, he acknowledges that great favor received from him. Otherwise also he is the crown prince who is to be accepted and honored. Then he bowed 3 times and they kissed each other, wept with each other, and David wept the more. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, since both of us have sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever. Therefore, the covenant was once again remembered by them, and they departed. And David escapes from the land of, or from the vicinity of Saul, we can say. And now what does he do? David understands to remain here in Israel, it will be dangerous for him. And he is fleeing away, and that is a story narrated here. We will find in chapter 21. And there we find David is fleeing away in haste, because he knew for sure that Saul is so angry and he will come to finish him. And therefore, he thought, better that I escape to the nation of the Philistines. Being a brilliant warrior, he thought he can live there anonymously, and if somebody comes against him, he can manage. And with that thought, he wanted to escape to Philistia. And now there is a problem. He had no food and no weapon. And now what happens? Since he was rushing away from Saul, he went to Nob. And the priest there was Ahimelech. And he went to the priest and asked him. Okay, and Ahimelech already knew who David is. Everybody knew who David is. And he said to the priest Ahimelech, I have come in haste to accomplish a mission and could not take a weapon with me. Therefore, kindly give me a sword. And he said, we have no sword here, but we have a special sword kept here, and that is a sword which was used by Goliath. And the sword of Goliath is kept here, and that is the only thing we have. And he said, okay, give me. And he took the sword. And then he asked for some food. Then he said, we have no food, but only the bread that is removed from the temple of the Lord, or from before the tent of the presence of the Lord. Because every Sabbath day they used to change the bread by replacing new bread. And the bread that is taken from the tent, that is considered to be something consecrated or sacred, and that could be eaten only by the priest. But now he says, okay, and that is a story referred to by Jesus himself, we know. And here the priest offers him that bread too, and therefore he gets some bread to eat, and he got the sword as a weapon. And now he proceeds further, and that's the story we find. And therefore he got this, and he escaped to Gath, that is the city of Philistine. And when he reached there, hoping that nobody would understand him, but it happened that the people recognized him, and they began to whisper, here is the leader of Israel. He is called the King of Israel, or to be the King of Israel, the one. And therefore it was told, or it was a rumor, and it reached the king of Gath. And the king came to see him. David knew his life was in danger. He has to do something to save himself. And what did he do? He pretended to be mad and began to scratch on the door, and the spittle flowing through the mouth. And in a sight, he would appear to be a totally madman. And now when the king came to see him, he saw David as a madman. And now what is his reaction? And he said, why should he bring this madman to me here, and let him go his way, or let him go. That is the reaction. And now the question, why he pretended to be mad? Because that was the only way to save his life. That is, a madman is supposed to be possessed, and nobody can kill one who is possessed. If one is killed, the evil spirit will enter into the person who kills, and therefore nobody will dare to kill a possessed man. And thus David was able to save his life by his shrewdness. That is what we see here. Okay, now stop the session, and tomorrow we will continue again in the next chapters. Okay, thank you.
All-powerful God, give us the wisdom to discover you, the intelligence to understand you, the diligence to seek after you, the patience to wait for you, eyes to behold you, and a life to proclaim you, through the power of the Spirit of Jesus, our Lord. Amen.